over many years, I've had a lot of people come to me and say, I want more spirituality in my life. Any of you ever said that? Thought that? Yeah. So I've been forced to sort of address that issue. And I've never really been able to find a really good definition for spirituality. So rather than try to do anything with that, I would always ask them, well, what do you mean by that? And they hemmed and hawed because they couldn't come up with a definition either. And so we struggled a little bit to what would having a more spiritual life look like? And so we talked about if I had a more spiritual life, what would that mean? What would that look like? And they came up with things like, well, I would be more alive. I would be more awake. I would be happier. I would be more joyful. I would be more involved. I would be more loving and caring and compassion. They talked a lot about the different sort of very human characteristics that we all share. Rarely, if ever, did words like God and sacred ever come into it. Occasionally, for those of us who may have that sort of spiritual bent or curiosity. But for most people, it was a matter of, how do I live my life better? So what can I do to make my awareness better, to make me a better person, to become a human being that's involved with other people? So rather than me try to explain to you what spirituality is, I want to take just a minute, just stop and think for a minute what a spiritual life would look like for you as individually. And just take a few minutes to think about what that would look like. What would it mean? What would you do? What would you be? How would you feel? What would it be like to live a more spiritual life? Many years ago, I had a woman from the congregation come in and talk to me. She felt really guilty. She felt badly. She was a mother and a wife, and she worked outside the home. In other words, she had no life of her own. It was all taken up with everything else that she had to be doing all the time. And historically, she had been a runner in her former life. But when her daughter came along and her husband came along and she'd have to work, she'd never had time for that anymore. So she wound up buying a treadmill. And she had it in the basement. And she would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And she would go down there and spend an hour on the treadmill. And she felt guilty about it because that hour was stealing time away from her family when she could be doing something for them. So I asked her, I said, so why do you do it then? If you don't feel good about it, why do you do it? And she says, well, I have to do it. I said, what do you mean you have to do it? She said, my life at home is so busy, running around and doing things and taking care of my daughter and my husband and the house and the pets and everything else. And then I have to go to work. And work, my goodness, I am so not in control of work. How many of you can relate with that? And she said, so that hour between 5 and 6 is the only time in my life when I am in control of who I am, where I'm going, what I'm doing. It is essential for my well-being. I said, okay, so that's self-care then, right? She said, yeah, but I feel guilty about it. And I says, well, what would you think if I told you that doing that in the morning was a spiritual practice? She said, nah. It's not. And I said, well, if you go back to it, and I says, from now on when you do that, think of it as a spiritual practice. Think of it a little differently. Don't feel guilty about it, but think about it as essentially a inherent, necessary part of your life, of who you are and how you live your life. That was about 15 years ago. And she's been doing the same spiritual practice every day ever since. And she came back and she told me one time, she said, you know, it's more important than ever. And it prepares me for my day a bit more than it ever used to before, because I'm aware of how important it is to me and how I do that. I'm reminded of another gentleman from the congregation that I never saw on Sundays. I would see him at social potlucks and events like that. And his wife was always at church, but he was never at church, which was okay. And he explained to me, he says, you'll never see me on Sunday because Sunday I stay home. It's my time. I sit at home and I read the New York Times cover to cover. And it's the only time in my whole day, in my whole week, when my time is my time. During the week, I work hard. He has a very high-pressure job, very CEO kind of a job. He says, and then on Saturday, it's all the chores and catching up on the things and everything like that. And he says, Sunday, everybody leaves the house, and I can sit at home, and I can read the paper and be myself. And I suggested to him, maybe that's a spiritual practice. He didn't buy it. Several months later, I saw him at another event, and he says, you know, maybe you had something there. Maybe that is a spiritual practice. So spiritual practices may not be the things that we think they are. Self-care, whatever feeds our soul, whatever fills our soul and makes it possible us to live with love and joy and peace and the strength of character to be a better person. It can be any one of those things. We have a good friend who lives in Italy, and he's an artist. He's retired now pretty much, but he still paints. He does landscapes of Tuscany. Oh, they're gorgeous. And he sells them in the piazza in Florence. And I was talking with him one day about, you know, he's older and he doesn't do as much anymore. He says, but he still needs to paint. He paint and paint. And I said, why? And he says, well, that creativity, it's a part of who I am, and I have to do that. He says, and the thing that gets me about it is, it's all about me when I'm painting. But then when I come here and some tourist comes along and oohs and ahs over my painting and talks about the beauty of it, and they want to take it home, he says, that's a gift to me. They give me the gift of giving them something special, something beautiful to add to their lives. My sister is a widow. She lost her husband about 2 years ago, and she really was having a very difficult time. Her best friend, who lived next door, had moved away to New Hampshire, and she was feeling very isolated and really at loose ends, didn't know what to do. And surprised me, but she decided to volunteer with Meals on Wheels. How many do Meals on Wheels? I know you do, John. Meals on Wheels. She said that now she does Meals on Wheels every Tuesday and every Thursday. And she has a whole bunch of people whose lives intersect with hers now, whose lives become important to her, that she spends time with, not just dropping off meals, but actually engaging with. And she says it gives her an excuse, not an excuse, but a necessary to get out of the house. So she can't stay at home and sort of wallow, but she has to be out. And in doing so, she's really engaging in something really worthwhile and essential for the lives of so many people. So I said to her, I said, well, you know, I wonder if that's a spiritual practice. And she agreed with me. No, she's my younger sister. She has to. So the point I'm trying to make with you is that we all have spiritual practices that we're already doing because they're essential to us, and we know that they're essential to us, and they fill a niche in our lives, and they do make us happier and more balanced and more joyful, or whatever us living a spiritual life feels like to you. About 20 years ago, I really like Buddhism a lot. It speaks to me, the precepts. And so I went to the Catskills for a week retreat. And we sat meditation 5 or 6 times a day, starting at like 4:30 in the morning. Ooh. And we did that for a week, and I was really immersed in it, and I really enjoyed it immensely. But I came home and I said to myself, you're not made to meditate. It hurts your back and your legs fall asleep. And so I decided not to do that. But I really like the idea of attention, paying attention. I went with our 3rd and 4th grade pilgrimage group to Walden Pond a number of years ago. And while we were there at the gift store, I bought myself a shirt that says, "Only that day dawns to which we are awake." Henry David Thoreau. It's in your order of service there. And I thought, yeah, that's it. Only that day dawns to which we are awake. So how do I wake up? How do I pay attention? My favorite story, apocryphal story, not in the Buddhist tradition, is that when Mohandas Gandhi was scurrying to catch a train, and his whole entourage was scurrying along with him as the train was leaving, and they ran after it and grabbed the handrail and hauled himself up onto the train, and one of his sandals fell off. He immediately reached down, took off the other one, and threw it. And one of his followers said, "Master, why did you do that? Now you don't have even one sandal." And he says, "True." He says, "But now the person that finds the one has a pair." I want to be able to do that. Unfortunately, it's not going to be running for a train, and it's not going to be a sandal. So how do I prepare myself to live the life that when that moment comes, I can be Mohandas? How do I prepare myself? What kind of things can I do that can open my mind up to the possibilities of every single encounter that I'm going to be faced with every single day? So I have a spiritual practice. Every morning I take my cup of coffee and I go out and I sit on my front porch on my swing. And we live in the woods. And I sit there and I glide back and forth. And I think today is going to be a day full of opportunities. It's going to be like that, but I don't know what it's going to be. I'm going to live today in such a way that tonight I'm not going to say, I could have done that or I should have done that. I'm going to live today so aware and so awake to each moment that is precious that I can be totally awake to it. I have a second spiritual practice. My wife gave me this little wooden Buddha many years ago. He sits on the dashboard of my car. God, I hate driving. It's not driving, it's the people that I encounter when I'm out there. And so as my blood pressure goes up and up and up, I take a quick gander at the Buddha sitting there and I say, always do something good, not something bad. How can I be more patient, more compassionate when people cut me off, when people speed, when people, whatever they do? How can I be so present in this hateful task that I can be a human being? So those are my 2 spiritual practices. And as I've been talking, hopefully you've been thinking about spiritual practices, a spiritual life, what it would mean, what it would look like, and perhaps even some of your ideas of what you do as a spiritual practice. So I'd like to ask for you to share some of those ideas. There's a courageous woman.
When something happens to irritate me, I have to put it up to my face? Okay. When something happens to irritate me or someone cuts me off in traffic, I think, wow, he must really need to use the bathroom.
That's rationalization, but a good one.
So find why did that person do that? He must have
Right.
a good reason for doing it. Even though I wouldn't do it, he must have a good reason.
Well, I watch these people go speeding down the highway, especially over in New Jersey, and I think, I hope you get there and don't kill anybody else on your way there. I'm sorry?
Or if somebody dies, if that person hasn't already made it.
Well,
yeah. Cooking is my spiritual practice. It releases my creativity, centers my concentration, and I realize that the finished product is going to bring pleasure to the people that I serve it to, and that brings me deeper pleasure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's one that people have often mentioned, cooking. Gardening. How many of you garden? Yeah. I mean, getting your hands in the dirt and just, creativity is a big part of it.
My spiritual practice is watching the beautiful birds that come to my house every morning, and they share my coffee with me.
Yeah. We have bird feeders all across the front of our porch, and it's amazing to watch them. And there's like 4 or 5 different species will be there, and they don't fight over it. They share. And it's like, why can't we do that? I had one woman once told me that her spiritual practice is sending cards. How often, I know I do, most everything that my communication goes by email or messenger, and she sent cards. How many of you gotten a card? How did it make you feel when you get a card? Whether it's a birthday card or a condolences or an anniversary or whatever. She said that, like you, it feeds her soul to send it, knowing that other people, when they get it, it feeds their souls. So sending cards, what is postage is 63 cents? Oh, come on, people. What do you do that feeds your soul? What do you do that makes your life more full?
I'm sitting next to my daughter and my husband.
That fills life right there. Yeah, absolutely.
My spiritual practice is reading, because I very much enjoy seeing life through someone else's eyes. I like memoirs quite a lot because of that reason, because I can step outside myself and see the world in a different way.
And can inspire you to be a different kind of person, larger person, bigger person, maybe. Yours is singing, right?
No. It's definitely music. Just this summer I've been able to go to a couple of locations and see concerts, and it's something about hearing music. Contemporaneously, hearing the music this morning also brings me joy, and it's definitely spirituality. It puts you in a position that's, it's nothing like listening to a Bach mass, and realize, wow, this guy wrote this over 300 years ago, and I'm still feeling it.
anything that can just make us more aware and appreciate things. I have another thing, one of my favorite things, well, two other favorite things I do. As it said in the order of service, we go to Florence regularly. And how many of you have been to Florence? How many of you have been to San Miniato? It's the oldest church in Florence. It's on the hill up above the Michelangelo Piazza. So you have to go up a lot of steps to get there. Hardly anybody goes there. The tourists don't know about it. So you can walk in there, and it's almost more Romanesque than Renaissance. It's dark and it's quiet. The kind of place that you walk into and you automatically start to speak in a whisper because there's something there. As a non-theist, I'm not sure what that is, but there's something there. And I love to sit there in the quiet and just sort of be in the presence of something that's 1,000 years old, that people built with passion and with artistry and creativity. And it's fairly simple. It's not like the Duomo, but it's worth the trip if you ever go there. The other thing that we do is we go to the Outer Banks every year. And if you've ever been to the Outer Banks and just walk on the beach. My wife likes to walk on the beach. I like to sit on the deck. So we compromise, and I sit on the deck and she walks on the beach. But walking on the beach can certainly be a spiritual practice. Did I just see a hand go up?
Well, I just got into lap swimming. I guess it was during COVID. I've always had neck troubles, and I couldn't justify it, but I got a snorkel gear, and all of a sudden I don't have to move my neck. And I find I recite Spirit of Life and some things like that while I'm lap swimming. But recently I just tried something else, a paddleboard, a stand-up thing that you paddle, and I found that. It's very slow and very soothing. It takes a little bit of balance, and it's a little wobbly, but I think that feeds my soul when I'm down on a lake.
These all tend to be not sort of the normative things that people often think of as being spiritual practices. In this wonderful book by Barry Andrews, Transcendentalism and the Cultivation of the Soul, he writes, the Transcendentalists developed an array of spiritual practices they found helpful in their goals of transforming the self and their society. Not everyone in the Transcendentalist circle engaged in all these practices, nor with the same enthusiasm nor regularity. In some cases, they did not think of them as a spiritual regimen at all, even as they were recommending practices such as walking and simple living, as Emerson and Thoreau did in lectures and various writings. Some of them came to them naturally, simply by paying attention to what fed their spirits. Some they developed from their knowledge of classical philosophy and Eastern religion. Their practices still speak to the question of, how shall I live well today? And he lists solitude, contemplation, sauntering. I like that. Not hiking, sauntering. Go out here and saunter after the potluck. And simple living. But paying attention to what feeds your spirit. I'm reminded of the 23rd Psalm, restoreth my soul. What restoreth my soul? What makes me whole? What brings me peace and joy and calm? Whatever it is in my life that I need. So, one or two last comments for anyone who's being reluctant. This is a spiritual practice, speaking out.
One of the things that I've started to do lately is when I am out among people or on the phone and someone does something for me, like you get the thing, well, how can I help you? First thing I do is say, you can help me by, so they know that they're helping me and they know exactly what I want. But once they do and they deliver something to me, I make a big deal about it. You know, it's like, even if it's a server or just somebody that you called at AT&T and they answered the phone, it's like, I am really glad you answered the phone. You know? And they go like, I mean, people are taken back by it, and they'll check on you like, really? And you say, yeah, really. I call this place 10 times, nobody answers the phone, but you answered the phone. So thank you. And people really, they light up. They seem to really enjoy being recognized for what they've done for you. It's just a courtesy, if nothing else, but.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. That was worth waiting for. I had to talk to Verizon recently. And I had the good fortune to have an outstanding conversation. So I asked the person afterwards, I said, can you give me the name or some contact information for your supervisor, please? And the person was really taken aback by that. And I said, well, I want to tell them what a good job you did. And to add on to what you're saying, to give them credit. But, you know, how often do we complain, but when we get something good, you know, we could say something good about people. And I saw another hand.
So I have multiple spiritual practices, like the reading, the gardening, the cooking, and coming here. But what really feeds my soul is when I try to use all of that collective wisdom and help my patients. I'm a pediatrician, and especially now with a lot of mental illness, you have to sort of feed our souls to be able to give. And then when you see that them, like suddenly something that you transfer to them, and you can see that comfort coming in their eyes and in the parents' eyes, that really, I collect those like gems.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Last call.
I practice random and anonymous acts of kindness.
I was shopping at Costco about 2 weeks ago. And when I left, came out to I guess I can turn this off. I came out to the stoplight there, and this woman ahead of me in this red Jeep of some kind, light turned green, and she pulled across the intersection, and she stopped. And I'm going, oh, hi, Buddha, yes. And I'm going, now what? She got out of her car, walked around back, popped the trunk open, took out one of those pre-cooked chicken breasts, roast chicken things, and gave it to the man who was standing on the island there, asking for help. Got back in her car and drove on her way. I was so embarrassed for being so impatient on such a kind, random act. And why couldn't I think to stop and do that? So I drive around with a chicken in the car now. But the thing is, that's not going to be what comes. So I know. So I'm done. No more comments. We're all done.